Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria. Week 2 of some major worsening problems for the NDP government on drug use in hospitals, the Surrey police saga, and an alleged kickback scheme involving CleanBC grants. Lots to talk about there, which is why we're bringing in the pod squad, Allie Blades, Jeff Ferrier, and Khelsilem. Thank you all for being here again this week. Let us discuss our first topic here, which we didn't really get to last week. It has exploded over the weekend and into this week, an alleged carbon tax kickback scheme in which there's an accounting firm named MMP. It's hired by government to administer some CleanBC grants, but it also has a grant writing business that charges 20% fees. And the critics are saying the company is part of the grant approvals while also trying to drum up grant business. MMP says it's not doing that. It is not as clear as a $16 glass of orange juice type of scandal, but it is now in front of the Auditor General because the company at the center of this, Edison Motors, had a big viral TikTok about their experience in the grant program, got more than 1 million views and kind of swamped the government as it went viral. So, Jeff, let us start with you on this. A worthy scandal, something that government is going to need to worry about? What's your take on what's happened here?
Yeah, I think it's not a great week for government on this file, to say the least. Here you've got a government grant system. You've got questions around if it's been a fair process. Full marks to the Edison Motors folks for putting together what is really strong modern communication. It's not press releases. It's not PowerPoints. It's the power of TikTok and visual and emotion and real people telling real stories. So that was well done. So in this case, there are serious questions about MMP. It's one of the big accounting firms for people who don't know the acronym, and how to administer these grant funds, as you've raised. I think the government has finally done the right thing by initiating that investigation by the Auditor General. Just so folks know, this is an independent officer of the legislature who reports to the legislature and through them to the people of BC, and not the government. So we can be certain that what the Auditor General finds and the actions that he recommends, if there are any to be taken, if he finds wrongdoing, if there are further steps to take, that will be clear to everyone in British Columbia. As I said, it's a tough one for government, but I think maybe to the chagrin of the opposition, the government has done something here that many governments don't do when times are difficult. They didn't dig in, they pivoted, they changed their position, and they did the right thing and sent in the Auditor General. You
left out the part where they voted down the Auditor General the first time and then had to go back and do it again.
We can talk about that more, but I want to let other folks have a chance.
Fair enough. Khelsilem, what do you think of this? And then, the underlying kind of fuel on this fire is the carbon tax that we talk about every week, and the Premier defending that. And here's money that's supposed to be going to rebates that's caught up in some sort of problem and not actually going out to guys who are trying to build electric semi-trucks, which we need. What do you think?
So there's an obvious problem, I think, challenge for the government on this, and sort of the controversy, I think, is a problem for them. The way in which the facts are starting to come out, and I think it took a while to figure out what was going on. MMP is a very large accounting firm, a financial firm. They provide a lot of different services, and as more information came out, it definitely looks like it's one of those cases where the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. And you have one arm of a company doing one task contracted by the government. You have another arm trying to also run their business around this other service that they provide. And there probably wasn't enough communication in that. But not that that's an excuse, because at the end of the day, government needs to be assured that when they are contracting out these types of services to firms like MMP, that there are certain checks and balances in place to prevent these kinds of challenges. And whether it's an actual conflict of interest is not the problem. It's when there's an appearance of a conflict of interest, which is a standard that is applied in many cases because of this, because there's a public interest that needs to be protected and integrity of the process. Governments sometimes don't have the capacity to administer grants, and so they contract it out and they do it, whether sometimes it's foundations, nonprofits, or companies to get the money out quicker. Otherwise, they have to build up a whole infrastructure to do it. I think having the investigation happen, finding out all the facts, finding out where the wrongdoing is in terms of policy or procedure and that kind of stuff, and fixing that is imperative for the government. They did take a few days to reflect on whether they would move in that direction or not. So yes, they did vote down the original motion from the other parties, and then took the weekend to think about it and came back and decided to then support it. So, a good political point to raise against them, but I think at the same time they probably needed a few days internally to figure out what was actually going on, and then to come to their preferred position to limit the risk on this. So it's not a good week for them on this front, and it's not a good look for government when they're trying to advance some of their climate goals with the funding that they've accumulated through things like the carbon tax.
Mm-hmm. And try to argue to the public that the carbon tax rebates offset the carbon tax because they help companies like this guy and this Edison Motors, invent things that benefit our environment, and yet the money doesn't seem to be going to them. Allie, what do you think?
Well, I think the breakdown from all of this politically is very interesting. The NDP government made the decision after they were bullied by the opposition, which is exactly what the opposition is supposed to do. So this is a big win for all three opposition parties. Though the one quote that stood out to me the most was actually from Adam Olsen, who said, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." Like this whole thing just seemed very fishy. And now it'll be up to the Auditor General's office to determine if that's actually the case. The other aspect of this was the fact that it's a small business up against big government, and that's not a really good look for a government either. So they're going to have to wear that for a little while. And then finally, will this actually matter in an election year? I've been back and forth about this. There's been a conversation of if this is just going to be Victoria inside baseball. My analysis of this is that depending on how the NDP government treat this and treat the communications rollout from all of this, it could potentially become a big thing closer to the election if there's no answer, which I'll pause there to say that it might not actually be their fault. Like these sorts of things take time. So who knows if this is going to be done this year. But I think people who want to take down the NDP government will be waiting for this response, and others may not care too much when we go to the ballot. So I don't know. Let's see how the NDP treat this. But kudos to Chase at Edison Motors, who really did change the game here with social media and made this a big story. The little guy versus big NDP government.
Absolutely. And what I like about Edison Motors is a bunch of straight-talking loggers who created their own company to build electric trucks. And they just come out and say, you know what, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And you've got government and MMP saying, no, you don't understand. We've got consulting and accounting and different branches, and there's this, and then we can grant for grants, but we can administer grants. And it's like the real world colliding with the government spin. And it's just a fantastic example of how easily government can be dismantled by kind of common sense on this file, and had to launch an investigation.
Can I jump in on the timing stuff and just a couple other observations? One, my brother-in-law in Ontario sent me the link to the Edison Motors video. So that gives you a sense of how well they did and how much their message resonated with folks. I think Allie is right that the government will likely be judged on how it responds more than what's happening here. So they need to be really careful and thorough, and the next steps they take are going to be really crucial. Here's my theory on why they voted against the Auditor General the week before, but then voted for it the week following, and actually had to run through some legislative hocus pocus to make it all happen. So, I don't have an inside knowledge of this. So this is just all me spitballing based on time I've been in government. But get the initial allegations, media picks it up, gets a lot of traction, other people see it, other people involved in the grant program, or in this case, see it. They go to government. They say, hey, we saw that. Let us tell you about what happened to us. And so what started as one becomes many. And so that's when government steps in and launches an investigation. The opposition demands share the details, share the new information. But by that time, everyone's lawyered up. It's a matter of extreme scrutiny in the public. Anything government says or discloses puts government at risk of getting their pantsuit off with taxpayer money on the line. So they clam up. So I think that's kind of, if I'm guessing, that's my operating theory about why the vote yes after the vote no, and why they haven't been as forthcoming as some folks would like with information as to why they did that.
Yeah, totally plausible. I could completely buy that. There's timelines in this now, so we'll pick it up again. I think it's around June that there's an interim report, and then before the election. So it's not something that will carry through after the election. We'll get a good sense of what happened here. Let us move on to our next topic here. Last week we talked about this memo from Northern Health that discussed open drug use and weapons in hospitals, how staff shouldn't take action to stop either of those. Well, over the last week, nurses from Campbell River to Surrey, Interior Health, Northern Health, Victoria, St. Paul's and Vancouver, they all go public with these firsthand stories of rampant drug use daily inside hospitals, smoking, nurses walking through fentanyl smoke, drug dealing occurring inside hospitals, and link it back to decriminalization. The health minister announces a task force to harmonize policies on this. Khelsilem, is that going to cut it, that response to kind of all of these sort of very interesting, concerning kind of front line staff stories that have been coming out over the last week?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody really loves a government response when it's to form a committee in response to, I think, a serious issue that's happening on the ground. It is a tool at the toolbox of government to be able to try and address a complex or complicated issue, but it might not suffice. And I think the government has to address legitimate public safety concerns within hospitals. It also has a challenge in trying to be successful with its harm reduction and safe supply strategy and I think approach. We're obviously seeing a response from the opposition parties that is a bit more critical, perhaps a little bit more tough on crime, a bit more stringent or a bit more hard on rules and banning and enforcing and security and things like that. So I think the overall challenge for the government is that they have a particular point of view and a particular policy that they're trying to advance. And if they're not successful at that, then it's going to undermine all their efforts around the safe supply, decriminalization, harm reduction approach. Many of the other parties want to reverse all of that. They want to go back to the way it was before. And the risk is right now, you don't have a lot of governing parties that have those with addictions, those with mental health issues in mind when they're crafting these policies, which is they're currently trying to do, and trying to balance that with the sort of very serious concerns and serious risks around the harm to workers within hospitals and the harm to other patients who are trying to access medical service. So governments in this government specifically, the NDP government, has a challenge to try and figure out how to balance those things. I don't think that a task force is going to be the kind of response that the public will want to see or hear. There needs to be specific actions within hospitals, within medical services that actually address the concerns. But they also are going to have to keep figuring out how to advance their stated goals around the other issues like harm reduction.
When I started seeing all these nurses come forward and sort of tell these stories, and then near the end of the week, we got some families who were sort of talking about having like an elderly resident in hospital in a shared room with someone who was openly smoking drugs, and their friends are coming in with drugs and their personal belongings are going missing. To me, those two things, it makes it very hard, I think, politically for the NDP to not move in some manner on decrim. And I can't help but pick up this kind of sentiment that they may not be able to hold their position on decrim the way we've been talking about in previous weeks. What do you think?
It's becoming increasingly challenged for the NDP. Obviously, we keep talking about it every week almost, where we talk about, and to some of Khelsilem's point, there's a divide on almost who to prioritize. And that sounds crass to say. Do you prioritize the person on the other side of the hospital where they're trying to seek treatment, or the person who is struggling with addiction, who is trying to use in the hospital? Whose safety is more important? I mean, really, if we break it down, that's what we're talking about here, right? And how do you protect both of them? It's practically impossible. But right now, the nurses, the patients, they're winning the communications air war on this, because we're seeing all of these stories and they're heartbreaking. We saw the story of the nurse who had to stop breastfeeding. There was a hospital in Penticton who shut down part of their hospital because of an odor that they didn't quite know. So maybe it was illicit drugs. Now, what do we do? How do we move forward? Politics is all perception. And so we have to see the NDP government trying to do something, but what will actually work, who knows? The obvious answers seem like more security, more support in hospitals. You mean to tell me those hospitals that are already struggling with a ton of other challenges, and now we've added another element to it? This is not going to be an easy thing for anyone to be able to fix, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. But it is a larger philosophical conversation of who we're trying to prioritize and keeping safe here. And I don't know if we're going to be able to do both of them in the same way.
Jeff, what do you think? And I'm reminded of the mayor of Portland's comments to the New York Times the other week when Oregon recriminalized drug possession, where he just cited sort of public fatigue at the issue of open drug use, and just kind of people just had enough. And I wonder if the hospital kind of branch of this narrative carries down that path.
There's two issues that are separate but related. So I'll start with decrim, and I hear the mayor talking. People are in Oregon are tired of the perception of open drug use. I think that's different than decriminalization is causing a rise in drug use and drug deaths. Because if that were true, we would be seeing British Columbia's drug use and drug deaths go way up. And in other jurisdictions, it would be flat or going down. But what we're seeing in the United States and other provinces is the same thing that's happening in British Columbia. Drug use going up rapidly, drug deaths going up rapidly. In Alberta, which is often cited as the big alternative to British Columbia, the RCMP last year reported that their drug calls, helping people in distress, were double that they were the year before in record deaths. So I think it's wrong to make a link between decriminalization and the rise in deaths. But there is that perception, that is the issue. I think we're also talking, though, about the safety of nurses in hospitals and the safety of patients in hospitals, which is a really important issue. My kids' grandmas were both nurses. We all know how much nurses sacrifice, don't get paid a whole lot to do an awful lot for us when we're at our most vulnerable. So my advice to Adrian Dix, task force is a good start, but you need it to be more than a gab fest between government senior officials and health authority senior officials. You need more of a strike team, really. You need to bring frontline workers who are going through this and experiencing this, surrounding them with money and resources, and asking them, and whether it's nurses or other folks working in hospitals, what do you need? What can we do now? How can we make it happen? And it's got to be focused on action, not on policy review or communication review or training. It's got to be focused on action that makes nurses and patients safe.
I think it's about harmonizing the policies, which is not really the issue. The policies are in place. You're not supposed to be smoking drugs in a hospital room. People do it anyway. So we only have a couple minutes left in the TV portion here. I just want to squeeze in Surrey policing continues. Government had an offer on the table. Surrey rejected it. That's where we stand. Everybody, just quickly, let's go around. Khelsilem, blah. That's my question on Surrey policing. Blah. What do we do now?
The government's going to have to push through. That's at the end of the day, they don't really have a lot of options left, I think. And I think the mayor of Surrey seems bent on keeping this as a political issue for whatever reason. I mean, she did get elected with a very slim minority of support to become mayor, and it's a very precarious political situation. I think, as you learned with Kennedy Stewart, you can't govern, your city without really approaching it from, I have to reach across all the political spectrums to try and win that support, because I'm already starting from a bit behind. And so I think that this is sort of another fight that's going to continue, and the government's out of options other than pursuing I think the end goal that they've always wanted.
Mm-hmm. Allie, just quickly, what do you think?
So Mayor Luck isn't going to budge, no matter what evidence lands on her desk, no matter how much money is thrown at the city of Surrey. What's going to be interesting to follow, though, is how this leads into October. Typically, we wouldn't care very much on how provincial political parties or elected representatives interact with the municipality on this issue. But what we're seeing is that she's increasingly become isolated. There aren't any political parties that are coming to her defense. And so will this be an issue that the BC United, the BC Conservatives, the Greens, everyone is going to have to determine publicly where they stand? Probably. And that they don't necessarily want to do, but they're going to have to.
Solicitor General sees what Surrey's doing here, trying to drag this out till the provincial election so that they can say, look at the big tax increase that the NDP is going to foist on you if you vote for them for this police thing. We will see if the BC government, and I expect they will, act decisively to put this dead parrot of an issue to rest once and for all, or if it's an issue that's just pining for the fjords. And this topic of Surrey policing is a BC punditry's endless doom loop conversation that we'll keep having till we're no longer on this earth.
Parrot's not dead, it's just sleeping. That's really where we're at.
So yes. Poetic, Jeff.
Nice plumage, nice blue plumage.
All right, we will leave it there. God knows we're going to end up talking about Surrey policing again. So that's it for this time, though, and that's it for the show. To the panel, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for additional content. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.